Good afternoon, Chuck Morse, Left Right Radio. Every afternoon live here at Facebook at noon and downloaded on YouTube and all the other servers syndicated. My guest is Richard Fields. Richard is the press secretary for the National Libertarian Committee, the Libertarian Party. Richard, thanks for joining me.
My honor. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Richard, let's talk a little bit about how you got involved in libertarian politics and a little bit of background on the development of the modern Libertarian Party in the United States.
I share a background with you in radio. I was doing a radio talk show in Racine, Wisconsin back in 1971. A couple of people I had never ever heard of before called and said, we have a new political party that's got a candidate for president. We'd like to get on your show and talk about him. Now, I had been interviewing local politicians for a couple of years. Les Aspin, you may remember him. He was the secretary or the Secretary of Defense under the Carter or the Clinton administration. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, when I knew him, he was a representative from our congressional district. So I interviewed him. I interviewed Fighting Bob or Doug LaFollette, who was a sure-tail relation of Fighting Bob LaFollette of Wisconsin LaFollettes, and and a whole bunch of other local.
Weren't they Farmer Labor?
What?
Weren't they the Farmer Labor Party, the LaFollettes?
No, well, that was in Minnesota, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, yeah. But it was close. It was the Progressive era. So anyway, I got this husband and wife on the show, and I started asking them the usual questions that I would ask of politicians, and they got all the answers right. And so I took an interest. They were promoting the candidacy of then John Hospers and Tony Nathan. John Hospers for president, Tony Nathan for vice president. Tony Nathan was the first American Jewish woman to receive a vice presidential nomination. Wow. John Hospers was the first openly gay man to receive a presidential nomination. And I thought,
and this is 72?
71. 71
okay.
When I talked to them in the 72 election.
Right.
And so I signed up immediately, and I've been a libertarian in one form or another ever since. I've run for office. I've hosted the Libertarian Counterpoint, which is a local cable access TV show in Sacramento since the early 90s. And I've been involved one way or another ever since.
Now, I think that libertarian philosophy most accurately reflects the American ethos, going all the way back to the founding of the Republic. Which is limited government and personal responsibility and, in a voluntary sense, an embrace of the Judeo-Christian underpinnings of our civilization. And yet the actual party, the development of a party, that really has not become a major political force in terms of electing congressmen and senators, presidents. It still isn't quite there yet as a third party that can really conduct a national campaign, or is it? And what's going on with that?
Well, you're right in the sense that we don't have any officials elected at the federal level and relatively few at the state level. We have a number of people who have been elected at the local city council, county board of supervisor level. Those are the farm team. Those are the people who I think will move up in political circles as time goes by. We've got Laura Epke as a state representative or state senator in Nebraska. So we have a few, but we're in the growth stage. Part of that is due to the fact that the Democrats and Republicans have effectively put together a duopoly and made it very, very difficult for independents of any or third parties of any kind to get on the ballot in the first place and to get equal coverage from the dinosaur media in the second place. So it's an uphill battle. If you take a look at Harris polling information, Harris polled not Harris, it was Gallup. Gallup polled back in 2016 as to what the underlying philosophy of Americans is. And broadly defined, libertarians make up about 27%, conservatives about 26%, liberals about 23%, and populists about 15%. Obviously, that's not reflected in people who are holding office, but we think that we're just one catalyst away from that changing dramatically. It'll take just one black swan event before libertarians are able to turn that general feeling of support into actual elected office.
Now, the last election, I thought that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld actually had appealed toward millennials, toward younger people, in a way that I had not seen before. And in a way, it sort of coalesced around people who are tired of the bickering of the two major parties. And I think they garnered a good deal of support, both from people who would be conventionally described as liberal and conservative.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how'd they do in the election?
They ended up with, I think, it was about 4% of the vote. In polling, early polling, the Johnson-Weld campaign was in the 10 to 15% range. And I think it would have been able to gain traction, except for the problem that the dinosaur media, the mainstream media, is controlled by basically six corporations: NBC Universal, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. And all of those media companies are solidly in bed with Democrat, Republican, left-right politics, and there's no way they're going to give coverage to any third party, whether it's Libertarian, Green, or anybody else. So as soon as Gary Johnson and Bill Weld started getting traction with millennials, sort of the same phenomena that happened with Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. Right. As soon as that started to happen, Hillary Clinton's advisors picked up on that very quickly and started sending out a whole lot of negative Facebook ads and so forth. They latched onto the Aleppo moment and wouldn't let that die, even though both Clinton and Trump certainly made faux pas as bad as that or worse, but they were ignored. It wasn't ignored with Gary Johnson. So it was this tiny little Libertarian Party with a former small state governor up against basically you can call it the deep state, you can call it the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called it. I call it the military-industrial intelligence security welfare complex, because all of those. I think that's good. All of those parties. And you talk about the kind of, I would describe it as a collusion between the Democratic and Republican parties. I don't know the details, but my understanding, and maybe you know something about this, is that sometime in the 1960s, 70s, whenever, they literally got together at a hotel somewhere and they hashed out that this is how we're going to control the national debates. This is how we're going to make sure that only our two parties will have monopoly on who is elected. And they kind of came up with a kind of an informal agreement at that time. Yeah, absolutely. It was as a result of the 1992 and 96 elections when Perot made made inroads in the political or the presidential race, and they took the debates away from the League of Women Voters and put it into a presidential debate commission that Democrats and Republicans, and only Democrats and Republicans, had control over. So that's what happened.
And basically, of course, when you mention Perot, who got 19% of the vote in 1992, it gets to one of the problems that I have kind of with the Libertarian Party and with third parties in general, and that is that because of Perot's vote, Bill Clinton was elected president as a minority president in the popular vote. Perot, I think that you might say that Gary Johnson might have threatened the election of Donald Trump, who I support. And that in a sense, the third party candidate can do a number on the candidate that really is going to win. In 2000, Pat Buchanan, I think, drew away from George W. Bush, which led to the Florida recount. I suppose that it's a conundrum in terms of, I want to support a third party because I believe in their principles and their politics. But at the same time, I want to recognize the pragmatic reality, which is that most likely the president is going to be from one of the major two parties. And I don't want to take my vote away from whichever party I want to support.
Yeah, I think the problem with that way of thinking, in my view, is that there is a commonly held belief, buttressed by the mainstream media, that there's actually a difference between Democrats and Republicans. If you take a close look at actual policy, you'll always find enough Republicans that vote in Congress to keep, for instance, Obamacare alive, or other policies and programs that benefit the Democrats. Likewise, you will. McCain was a good example of that. Susan Collins.
Yes.
Likewise, you will always see enough Democrats to keep the military-industrial complex alive. Hillary Clinton was a perfect example of that.
That's
so
right.
there is not, and I don't think it's because they particularly, the people who vote with the other side particularly have an agreement with that, but they know that in order to keep their duopoly alive, they have to keep all of the constituents of that duopoly alive, and that's the military-industrial, intelligence, security, welfare complex.
I think your point is well taken. I mean, the proof of that would be that Republicans in the last 8 years of Obama made a lot of noise about getting rid of Obamacare, which is a massive takeover by the federal government of our healthcare and our ability to make healthcare decisions. And yet, knowing that Obama wasn't going to let that happen, now that Obama's out of office and you've got Trump who actually wants to get rid of Obamacare, suddenly they show the true colors, which
Exactly.
is that they had no intention of getting rid of Obamacare. I mean, they wanted to get reelected and they wanted to posture.
It's all lip service.
That's right. And we can point to so many other examples of that. I mean, this recent budget, $1 trillion in spending. Now the federal deficit is up to about 21 trillion, I believe, last I checked.
And we're adding $1 trillion a year into the
what's $1 trillion or two between friends, right? I mean, they're all like, hey, they're putting in all of this payoff to liberal causes and massive spending, massive borrowing from the Federal Reserve and from private investors, which is about a third of the budget, interest rate payments.
Yeah, you bring up the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is the great enabler of what's happened over the last really 100 years, and with a whole lot of emphasis ever since 1972, when Nixon took us effectively entirely off the gold standard.
Yep.
Yeah. So what you have is a situation where, and this is a situation that's untenable, that can't last forever. But what's happened for ever since 1970, early 70s, is that the money, newly created, essentially counterfeit money, because the government has given the Federal Reserve the legal ability to counterfeit money. The money is available to be borrowed to fund all of this stuff. It's all borrowed money. None of it is saved money. It's all borrowed. So, and at some point, the amount of the ability to pay the interest on borrowed funds, whether it's the private sector or the public sector or the business sector or individual borrowers, pretty soon you get to a point where you cannot afford to make the interest payments, much less pay down the principal. And we're getting very close to that point right now.
We are. I believe the interest
payment.
I
think that could be one of the black swans that makes it possible for libertarians to break through. We're seeing a whole lot of people, started in 2016, it's continuing. We're seeing a whole lot of people who don't trust the mainstream media, go to other sources of media like yours to get the real truth, to find out what's really going on. I spend a lot of time listening to, I get up early in the morning and listen to Washington Journal, I think it is, on C-SPAN. And it's interesting because they have a lot of calls from the public. They don't screen the calls. They're totally unscreened. And so you get,
I've heard that,
you get what people are really thinking. And what people were really thinking in the 2016 election is, we don't like the status quo politically. We don't like what's going on. We're not exactly sure why, but it just doesn't feel right. And people would actually say during the 2016 campaign, I'm not going to vote for Hillary. I'm going to vote for, I haven't made up a mind. It's either going to be Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. I'm not sure which.
There you go.
And both of them were campaigning as outsiders.
And they were outsiders in many ways. And they both, a lot of their agendas were very compatible with each other, ironically, which brings me to the issue. I mean, I agree with you with regard to with Congress and the Democrats and Republicans, except, I mean, I suppose you have the Freedom Caucus on the Republican side, and on the Democratic side, you probably have outright socialists getting together and they are different than this mainstream industrial complex that you make reference to. And but yet at the same time, on the presidential level, you do have this guy like a Donald Trump who comes along, who is not connected to this establishment, who understands what this is about, and who is trying to deconstruct what Bannon accurately called the administrative state, something that has been implemented in this country going back to the Wilson administration. And it's really everything that libertarians have talked about. So what might have happened here is something that's happened in American history with third parties, going back to the anti-Masonic party of the 1820s, which eventually manifested itself in the presidency of John Quincy Adams, or the Progressive Party of the late 19th century, which was sort of absorbed by the Republicans. And that is that the libertarian message has been absorbed by the Trump movement. I mean, he really is.
Yes and no. I mean, I have to take issue with that to a certain extent. There's a phenomena particularly in presidential politics, where the worst promises are kept and the best promises are reversed or ignored, and we're seeing that in spades with Trump. Trump made a lot of libertarian noises and actually got some libertarian-leaning people to vote for him when he said, we want to get out of Syria, for instance. We want to have a more non-interventionist foreign policy. We want to, he actually threatened not to come to the aid of NATO countries who were not paying their fair share of NATO dues. He was making a lot of non-interventionist, which is pure libertarian, noises during the campaign. True. Now, I think people from the CIA have gotten to him and said this is the way it is, and he's threatening warfare in Syria. He picked a fight, a verbal joust with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, bringing us very close to war there. He's doing the actual opposite of what he campaigned on. He's getting us more, $56 billion increase in the defense budget. He's actually basically caved in to the military-industrial complex in all the ways that matter, which is funding and which is continuing the perpetual wars. He made good promises as far as the drug war is concerned. He promised to stay out of medical marijuana, supported medical marijuana, and said that recreational marijuana should be left up to the states. Turned around and appointed Nixon acolyte drug warrior Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, who promptly got rid of the Cole Memoranda, which kept the feds out of enforcing federal drug laws on marijuana in states where it had been legalized. So what he has done is essentially reversed the promise that he made that would be amenable to Republicans. Now, I have to say the one area where he has been good, in fairness, is on appointments to the judiciary. He's been relatively good there. Gorsuch was a good appointment, and appointments at the federal bench have been for the most part good. And he's also been good on deregulatory efforts, particularly with the EPA and other of the more intrusive regulatory agencies, which have gone hog wild under the last 2 or 3 administrations. So he's done some good things there. Unfortunately, the judiciary will stick. I mean, the judges are around for a lifetime, but the regulatory reforms, they won't stick. As soon as he is replaced, the next Democratic administration will bring them all back in full force. So they're good for the time being, but they're not going to stick.
Well, I mean, I think that you can't be a purist in the sense that Trump, look what he's up against. I mean, it's not just liberal Democrats or the Democratic Party or liberals. He also is up against the Me Too Republicans, the liberal wing of the Republican Party. People like the Speaker and others. And he's up against the big multinational corporations, which tend to be top heavy on liberalism and big government, and internationalists and the globalists and all the people that want perpetual war and intervention. And I think that in that context, he represents, the man alone standing up and trying to do what he can do in a world which is really heavily stacked against him. The media, I've never seen anything more vicious and more of a drumbeat. This whole cockamamie conspiracy theory about colluding with Russia, that's like they've got that thing, it's distracting him and hanging over his head. I mean, I think that it's time for libertarians to get behind him. And
well,
say,
yeah,
we're going to support him as a libertarian.
Yeah, libertarians, other than a few libertarians have Mises people, and a few a few more alt-right people who used to call themselves libertarians and don't anymore. But libertarians will never get behind a guy that wants to accelerate the drug war, a guy that wants to send bombs, really smart bombs, to Syria and get more involved in failed wars in the Middle East. We're not going to get behind a guy that's stirring the hornet's nest in Korea. He's done way too many things that are anti-libertarian for libertarians.
Understood. And as far as Korea goes, I think that it's been said by South Koreans, by Japanese, by others, that Trump's tough talk is bringing Kim Jong-un to the table, and he does. Yeah, and he does pose a world threat. I mean, he does have missiles that will eventually, according to experts I've heard, reach the western coast of the United States. So,
yeah, even if they did, a couple of missile strikes would take out the entire country. It would be a very short one.
But why go to that point? The point is,
why? I mean, it comes down to self-defense. Actually, now I don't have any sympathy whatsoever for Kim Jong-un or for the Ayatollahs or whoever is ruling in Iran right now, but I also believe in the right to self-defense, as libertarians do, which is the ability to defend against not only domestic aggressors but foreign aggressors. And Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans, as awful as their regime is, they do have the right to defend themselves against meddling by the United States. And we don't have the right to say, you can't, we can have nuclear bombs, you can't.
He is engaging in aggressive threats against the United States, threats that I think are to be believed. I think that what Trump is doing there is part of a negotiation by tightening the screws on them.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, that will bring them to the table in the same way that Ronald Reagan was able to affect the collapse of the Soviet Union without firing a shot. He did it.
Maybe that's the game plan. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, economic pressure and getting together with like-minded allies to sort of contain Russia to the point where they eventually imploded on their own rot. So those, to me, in my way of thinking, those are not engaging in wars. Those are engaging in very tough and strong diplomacy from a position of strength to make sure that this country is safer, the rest of the world is safer. So, I mean, excuse me?
I was going to say, what is not engaging in war is the trade wars and the immigration wars. He has started a trade war which is totally uncalled for, totally unnecessary, anti-consumer, anti-prosperity, and will not be easy to win in spite of what he is tweeting. What he is doing is repeating the same mistakes that were made during the 1930s, the Taft-Hartley era, where the trade war started by one country is the tit for tat met by another country, and you end up basically shutting down world trade. That is not a good thing. Trade wars lead to hot wars. The trade wars of the 1930s led to World War II without question. He has put us in great jeopardy of a world war simply by starting the trade wars. And as far as immigration is concerned, one of the biggest problems with immigration is most people support liberalizing immigration. That's a majority position in this country. The people who don't support liberalization of immigration are basically fearmongers who are worried about losing jobs to immigrants. In other words, they're worried about competing with people that they don't want to compete with. Well, sorry. What we need in this country is more immigration, more growth. The greatest growth in the United States occurred during the 19th century when immigration was essentially unrestricted. I wrote a piece, you mentioned the founding documents. I wrote a piece just recently about the Declaration of Independence. And in the Declaration of Independence, one of Jefferson's complaints was that the king had prevented migration hither to these states. He was complaining about the lack of immigration, the prevention of immigration by the English crown. Jefferson realized, and libertarians realized, that you need to have immigrants, or certainly immigrants are a good thing when it comes to economic growth. We talk about the fact that Social Security and private pension plans and local pension plans are going broke. Part of that is demographic. We have baby boomers, people my age and older, who are growing in number because of longer lifespans. And we have millennials who are shrinking in number because people my age didn't have as many kids as our parents did. So we have a lack of working people to support people who are getting pensions of one kind or another, private or public. Adding people to the working portion of the population, that's immigrants, is probably the only thing that can save our pension plans and Social Security and other retirement plans.
Well, first of all, as far as trade is concerned, I don't think that there is a trade war. There may be in the next several months. The tariffs haven't actually been implemented yet, nor has China implemented. There's just a lot of talk right now and a lot of negotiation. And I think this is part of, first of all, what President Trump would call the art of the deal, because China has a very unfair trade imbalance with the United States, and they're dumping very cheap products on the United States, which is hurting American industry.
Helping American consumers.
It's hurting American industry and it's hurting American labor. Now, I'll tell you, trade policy is something Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the Constitution authorizes Congress to regulate tariffs and trade. This is an argument that goes back to the very founding of the Republic, and different administrations have tampered with trade policies, both in terms of liberalizing them and tightening them up. Like, for example, Thomas Jefferson, whom you've quoted, implemented such a strong trade tariff policy that he embargoed all imports. Then the result was an immediate dislocation of the economy in the last year of his presidency, but eventually and soon afterwards, it led to a huge boom in domestic industry because there was no choice but to see American industry develop. So there's an art and a science to trade policy that figures upon the free trade and free enterprise on the world stage, while at the same time protecting American industry and American labor. And that's something that, it can be balanced and should be balanced by every administration. Now, whether or not there's going to be a trade war, that remains to be seen. I doubt if there will be, because the United States still has a position of leverage with China and with other countries that can create a situation by which a small tariff can be implemented without raising the price of imports. Because if they're going to be creating a pair of sneakers for $3 and selling it on the American market for $80, they can absorb a small tariff that would protect domestic industry that's also doing the same thing. Now, as far as immigration goes, you're right. I think most Americans support a liberalization of immigration policy. It's very difficult for people who are, sufficient and who are, skilled, or who, for whatever reason, this country needs, to have them come here legally. The problem is illegal immigration. And the question is, if someone is, every sovereign nation has the right to decide who enters the national home, in the same way that you, Richard, or that I have the right to decide who enters our personal home. It's a basic.
That's a false analogy.
I think that it's a basic function of sovereignty that a nation decides. And I'm saying this from the position of understanding that immigration is good and that we should have an increase in legal immigration. At the same time, because of the welfare state that you started out with, and accurately, you have a situation where new immigrants, especially illegal aliens, are welcomed at the border by left-wing groups like the National Lawyers Guild and the ACLU and these service groups who put them on welfare and who are basically, they're not coming here basically as did my grandparents, as citizens to work and get a job and be self-sufficient and assimilate into American culture. They are immediately paid. We have to pay for them. We have to support them. I mean, I think it's 20% of our prisons have illegal aliens who have committed crimes, violent crimes against Americans. So it's not a matter of being against immigration. It's a matter of having immigration regulated in such a way that it is beneficial to our economy and our culture. And that's something that any sovereign nation does and must do. If they don't do it, then they're committing suicide.
I would agree with you that we are making a huge mistake in giving welfare to immigrants. I would take that a step further in saying we're making a huge mistake in making welfare available to anybody, native born alike. The problem, though, is welfare. It's not immigration. And
so that has to be solved before you can liberalize immigration.
Well, no, you got to check on an egg
we're going to
situation.
implode on the cost. Talk about a budget buster. And by the way, I think there is a place for welfare run by states and communities. I just don't think, I don't know if the federal government doesn't need to be into it. But the issue is that until that is taken care of first in such a way that, you don't have an expansion of welfare, and that people who come to the country have what's called a charge, which was the system before 1965, and which was the system my grandparents observed, where you came in under the sponsorship of a company which said, we're going to sign for this person for 3 years, that they will be self-sufficient or will take financial responsibility. And then you can have a policy that increases immigration for people who are willing to come here to work and who have jobs set up for them before they get here, so the economy can absorb them and grow.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you that the immigrants who come here and go immediately on welfare that's the problem. But if you take a look at the raw numbers or the actual statistics, you'll find that the propensity of immigrants to go on welfare is actually lower than the propensity of Native Americans to go on welfare. That's not to say that either should, but it's not the problem that the people who complain about immigrants going on welfare think it is. It is a problem. It's not a very serious problem. But that said, I would agree, get rid of welfare for immigrants. And I think most libertarians would agree that a simple welfare reform that says anybody that wants to, that's not a security risk, can immigrate to the United States, know that you won't get welfare for the first 20 years or forever, for whatever, a period of time. That, I think, would be a simple welfare to reform. Get rid of the volumes of immigration law that are just nuts, and make it real simple to immigrate, get a job, be a productive part of society. That way you don't have the complaints about sovereignty and the complaints about they're coming here to take our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. They're coming here to be productive citizens. And anybody who is a productive citizen is not only competing for jobs, but they're also competing for product and service, which creates jobs. So the whole job loss argument is a non-entity. It doesn't exist. People are immigrants create both supply and demand for jobs, as well as every other good and service.
Well, I mean, I think that immigration policy has to be calibrated to reflect what the economy is doing at any given time. And if the economy needs more labor, then yes, the immigration door should be opened. I also agree with President Trump's comments about the chain migration idea, which is something was implemented in 1965, in that if you are an immigrant, you should be able to bring in your immediate family, your parents and your children and your spouse. But the idea of then bringing in your cousins and your aunts and your uncles, and then they bring in their cousins and aunts and uncles, I would rather see us go back to a merit-based system. Why should somebody come in because they're somebody's cousin? I'd rather see people come in because they want to be here for reasons that can be determined and that they have a skill set that we need.
Eliminate all of the rules and regulations. If you want to come here and work, you're welcome, period.
Right. And if you have a job that you can come to, then yeah, I think we kind of agree on that. But, and again, it would eliminate illegal immigration, which is the problem that I think President Trump's trying to address, particularly on the southern border, which is in a state of lawlessness that's unbelievable. I don't know if you've ever been down there, but, you've got parts of that country that are, in Mexico where the government has no control anymore. It's run by drug gangs.
Yeah, and of course the problem there is that drugs are illegal. Make them legal, and the gangs lose 100% of their power.
Now, here's an issue the libertarians do get into very publicly: legalization of drugs. Which drugs do you think should be legal?
All of them.
Heroin?
Every drug. And the reason for that is that I believe that adults are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. Our job as citizens is to let other adults take care of themselves. Now,
But
I don't
children.
think that should be up to the parents. Parents should be able to take care of making sure that their kids don't do dangerous drugs. I don't think that's where the problem is. The problem is with adults using drugs and with adults being incarcerated. Something like 50% of our federal and state and local prison populations are there for drug use or drug dealing, as opposed to actual serious crimes against people. We have the highest imprisonment rate in the civilized world, if not the entire world. We put more people in jail than China does, or that that Russia does. It's shameful what we do as far as putting people in jail. We're taking opioid addicts and marijuana users. Nobody gets addicted to marijuana. We're taking them and throwing them in jail, making them into felons, putting them into jail where they are learning the skills of being burglars and other forms of criminal, as opposed to giving them the opportunity to work high. I mean, if you're working in a job that is not dangerous and you want to be high while you're working, it's not our job to, it's not our responsibility or job or role to say you can't do that. We can say that's not a very good idea. But I think the underlying theory here is this. Libertarians welcome, the left-right dichotomy is a false one. The real dichotomy is between authoritarian and libertarian. And libertarians we welcome liberals, we welcome conservatives, we have liberals, we have conservatives. The narrative that we help Democrats get elected by taking votes away from Republicans, or vice versa, simply isn't true. We take a vote away from both Democrats and Republicans. We believe that the only, put it down to the individual level. At the individual family level, we don't beat each other up. We don't steal each other's stuff in our own individual nuclear families. When it comes to the community level, we pretty much abide by that. We don't beat other people up. We don't steal their stuff. But when it comes to the national or the political level, we're more than happy to hire politicians to appoint cops to beat other people up and steal their stuff. That's called the IRS. And the problem is that if we're able to delegate violence, we're happy to do it. We as libertarians believe that the way to get people to believe what we believe is not through coercion, but through persuasion. If I can persuade you that X should happen or that Y shouldn't happen, that's fine. But if I try to force you to act in a certain way or not act in a certain way, that's going beyond the pale. And that's what government does.
Fair enough. I mean, that's, your positions are consistent and principled. And I certainly agree with you about putting marijuana users in prison. That's totally unjust. I think that a lot of that started during the Clinton administration, and that President Trump has said during his State of the Union address he wants to reform that.
Started during the Nixon administration.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah.
But the issue of the big drug use and like things like heroin and whatnot, I see that much more as a problem of stopping the import of those drugs into this country so people don't get hooked in them. And I think the reason
that's impossible. I mean, if we can't keep immigrants from crossing the border, and we can't,
right. You can.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
No, it's not. And the reason they're coming in is because of the corruption and the amount of money that's involved. I think from both sides and all sides that it's able to come in here because money talks. And it's a very difficult question, but I believe that if we can stop that drug flow, then you'll have less addiction. And to make those drugs available to people, these are very dangerous, purified substances that kill people and lead people to crime.
If they're legal, they won't be. People will know what they're getting. They'll know what the dose is. They'll know what they are actually using. Right now, they don't. If you're buying from your local drug dealer, you have no idea what you're getting in terms of dosage.
Yeah, but the thing is, the problem is that the oxycodines are so addictive and they're so refined that it doesn't matter almost what dose you're getting. It's a very dangerous drug, and the addiction leads to criminal behavior. Now, Richard, I want to move on to
legalize marijuana, and the
yeah,
number
okay.
of people using the opiates is going to go down.
No, I agree with marijuana. Maybe, I mean, I think it certainly should be decriminalized. I'm not sure I'm willing to cross into legal, but I've heard the Libertarian Party referred to as right-wing hippies. I don't know, you've probably heard that. And so it leads me to ask you, what is your position on some of the hot button social issues that seem to pop up and do pop up because they get into moral and ethical questions, like, for example, abortion and gay marriage?
Well, let me take abortion first, because that's an area where it really depends on how you define when life starts. Okay. Libertarians can and honestly can come down on both sides on that issue. If you believe that life starts at conception, then abortion is murder. If you don't believe that life starts at conception, but rather starts at birth, then abortion should be allowed. Most libertarians will fall into and I would fall into the latter camp. I believe that it's the choice of the woman, the choice of the family, and I think fathers should be involved in that choice as well. I think that's a situation where if you are against abortion, you should be able to use persuasion to persuade people not to get, or women not to get abortions, but you should not be able to force them or imprison them or otherwise penalize them for getting abortions. It's an individual choice. That's the more difficult question for libertarians. The gay marriage question is real simple. Who cares? Why should the government be involved in marriage in the first place? In fact, if you take a look at marriage law, the first marriage licensing laws were anti-miscegenation laws during the Jim Crow era. Government did not license marriages before it was possible to for blacks and for racial mixing. The original impetus for marriage licensing laws was racist. Get rid of marriage licensing laws. Marriage is a contract between two individuals, whether they're of the same sex or not is immaterial. It's a license, or it's a contract that should be decided upon. The terms should be decided upon by the people negotiating the contract, not by government with a one-size-fits-all contract.
What about polygamy and bigamy?
Well, the same thing. I mean, if people want, if some guy wants to have more than one woman to tell him what to do,
it's hard enough to have one, right?
or vice versa. If a woman wants to have more than one husband telling her what to do, more power to them. But I don't think that's going to be a huge problem.
Okay, all right, point well taken. So, Richard, we're reaching toward the end of the interview, so I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the horse race issues, the nuts and bolts issues. Where is the Libertarian Party positioned right now in terms of the upcoming midterm election? Where do you see yourself in the presidential election 3 years down the road?
Our voter registration, over 500,000, is up. I think it's 92% in the last 10 years. Our number of candidates is up over the last midterm election. We're aiming to field over 2,000 candidates statewide, nationwide, locally in 2018. Our revenue for the Libertarian Party National Committee and at the state level as well is breaking records for an off-year election, non-presidential election year. We are on a sustainable growth path, and any number of things could be the black swan that breaks the duopoly of power for Republicans and Democrats. We think that we need to be prepared to take the opportunities that are almost certain to come along, and we are preparing ourselves as we go.
And I think the best way to do that would be to have a national infrastructure that reaches into every state and as many communities as possible. Are you set up in all 50 states? I mean, where are you in terms of like local committees and state committees?
We're organized in all 50 states. There's a Libertarian Party structure in each of the 50 states. We're on the ballot, I think, in 39 states, and we'll be on the ballot in all 50 states, assuming the petition goes the way we anticipate that it will. We have a national per two people of the National Committee who are involved in candidate recruitment and candidate coaching to make sure that we are able to win winnable elections at the state and local level. We're doing everything that we can within the scope of our numbers and dollars to put ourselves in a position where we can actually win in 2018 more seats and parlay that into greater wins going forward.
And are you fielding candidates for Congress and Senate for this midterm? And if so, can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, Larry Sharpe is running for governor of New York. We've got candidates running for in congressional races all over the country. There are very few states where we don't have a Senate candidate. We are doing all of the spade work necessary to get people elected.
Okay, Richard Fields is my guest. He's the press spokesman for the Libertarian Party. Richard, let my listeners and viewers know where they can get in touch with the Libertarian Party. You can give out information about where people can find out more about your writing or whatnot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the best place would be to go to lp.org. LP.org is the website that will have a link to all of the articles that I write as press secretary, as well as articles that are written by other members of the Libertarian National Committee or other libertarians. Mine go under the byline of staff in most cases. So if you want to read my writing, that's where you'll find it. Okay. Right on the LP webpage, that's where you'll find all of the information you need to find your local or state LP party. It's all there.
Great. All right, Richard Fields, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. It's a really interesting conversation. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thank you very much. Hope to talk to you again soon and get some of our candidates on to persuade you that it's more important to vote Libertarian than to support the dinosaur duopoly.
They're welcome on any time. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thank you.